I will never forget Mrs. Sarah's pale face as she grabbed my arm at my mother-in-law's gate. "Don't go in," she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with terror. Her whole body was shaking as she glanced nervously over her shoulder at the house with its closed windows. I barely had time to process her words when the deafening sound of police sirens shattered the afternoon silence, and 2 cruisers screeched to a halt in front of the house. What I discovered in the next few hours would completely destroy everything I thought I knew about the man who had slept beside me for 7 years. The father of my 5-year-old son, who was sleeping in the back seat after our surprise trip to visit his sick grandmother. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. It all started 4 days ago. I was making dinner when Richard came home pale, talking on the phone. I turned off the stove and walked over worried about his expression. Yes, I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible." He hung up and looked at me, his eyes full of worry. "My mother is sick, very sick. I need to go to her house right now." Mrs. Beatrice lived in a small town, a charming place about 3 hours away. She was a strong woman, rarely sick, which made the news even more alarming. "What's wrong? Is it serious?" I asked, already thinking about what we'd need to pack. "I'm not sure. The family doctor called. He said she has a high fever. She's delirious." "It could be pneumonia." Richard was already pulling a suitcase from the closet. "You stay here with Petey. We don't know what she has. It could be contagious. I don't want to risk exposing you." I agreed, though reluctantly. "Mrs. Beatrice and I always had a close relationship different from most daughters-in-law and their mothers-in-law. She welcomed me like a daughter from day one, and the thought of not being there to help her bothered me. Call me when you get there, please, and keep me updated." Richard nodded distractedly while tossing some clothes into the bag. 20 minutes later, he kissed my forehead and Petey's head, who was watching cartoons in the living room, and left. For the next 2 days, I only received short texts from Richard. "Made it safely." "We're at the doctor's." "She's resting now." "Situation under control." The 3rd day, however, silence. My calls went straight to voicemail. My messages were left unanswered. A growing anxiety began to take hold of me. I tried to convince myself that Richard was probably busy taking care of his mother, maybe at a hospital with bad cell service. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging me. 7 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when something wasn't right. On the morning of the 4th day, I made a decision. Petey and I would make a surprise visit. Maybe Mrs. Beatrice was better, and our presence would cheer her up. If she was worse, Richard would need support, and I could help care for her. "Petey, how about we go visit Grandma? We can surprise her and Daddy," I suggested during breakfast. Petey's eyes lit up. "We're going to see Grandma. Can I bring her the picture I drew for her?" "Of course, sweetie. She'll love it." In a few hours, I packed a small bag with clothes for 2 or 3 days, Petey's medicine, some toys and snacks for the trip. Before leaving, I hesitated for a moment and tried calling Richard one more time. Voicemail again. I sent him a text saying we missed him and were worried without mentioning our trip. I really wanted to surprise him. The drive was quiet. Petey slept most of the way, and I got lost in my thoughts, oscillating between worry for Mrs. Beatrice and a strange feeling I couldn't name. Richard had been distant in recent weeks, more secretive, working late. At the time, I attributed it to stress from work. He was a financial manager at an investment firm and often talked about the pressure of managing clients' money. But now, driving down the highway, with only the low sound of the radio and Petey's soft breathing in the back seat, I started to replay small details. Moments that seemed insignificant in isolation but formed a disturbing pattern when put together. Calls he took in the backyard out of earshot, a new lock on his desk drawer at home, more frequent work trips, little lies about where he had been or who he was with. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. Was I being paranoid? Richard was a good husband, a loving father. If he was hiding something, it was probably a surprise for me or a work problem he didn't want to share. When we finally arrived in the quiet town where Mrs. Beatrice lived, the sun was beginning to set. I navigated the familiar streets easily to the yellow house with blue windows where my mother-in-law had lived since she retired from teaching. I immediately noticed something strange. All the windows were closed, the curtains drawn. This was unusual for Mrs. Beatrice, who loved natural light and fresh air. Richard's car was parked out front, which brought me some relief. At least he was there like he said. I parked behind his car and turned off the engine. "Are we here, Mommy?" my son asked, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we're at Grandma's house, but she might be sleeping, so we have to be very quiet, okay?" Petey nodded, unbuckling his seatbelt. We got out of the car, and as I pulled our bag from the trunk, I studied the house more closely. It was eerily silent. No movement, no light visible through the cracks in the curtains. If Mrs. Beatrice was sick and Richard was caring for her, shouldn't there be some sign of activity? "Come on, Mommy." Petey was already running towards the gate, excited to see his grandmother. I closed the trunk and followed my son. We were almost at the gate when I noticed movement across the street. A woman hurried out of one of the neighboring houses, waving frantically. Anna, wait!" she called in a low, urgent voice. I recognized her as Mrs. Sarah, my mother-in-law's lifelong neighbor, a kind lady who always offered us orange bread when we visited. Now, however, her face was pale, almost gray, and her whole body was visibly shaking as she crossed the street towards us. "Petey, wait here a moment. Mommy needs to talk to Mrs. Sarah." My son stopped, intrigued by the serious look on my face. Mrs. Sarah reached me panting as if she had run for miles instead of just across the street. "Don't go in," she whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for a woman her age. Her eyes were wide, terrified. "Something very bad is happening in that house." "What do you mean, Mrs. Sarah? Mrs. Beatrice is sick. My husband is taking care of her." No. She shook her head frantically. "Beatrice isn't here. She left 5 days ago to visit her sister in Chicago." My heart sped up. "Chicago, no. There must be a mistake. Richard told me she's sick with a high fever, maybe pneumonia." "Anna," Mrs. Sarah squeezed my arm tighter. "I'm telling you, Beatrice is not in that house, and something very strange is going on. Your husband arrived the day before yesterday, with another woman." It was as if the world had stopped for a moment. "Another woman, Richard?" The information just didn't make sense. It didn't fit the reality I knew. "It must be a nurse," I suggested weakly. "Or a doctor, maybe." Mrs. Sarah shook her head. "She was not a healthcare professional, Anna. And they didn't seem friendly. He dragged her inside the house. She looked scared." Before I could process what I was hearing, the sound of sirens shattered the quiet afternoon. 2 police cruisers appeared on the corner, approaching quickly. "Mommy, the police!" Petey exclaimed, running to grab my legs, frightened by the noise. The cruisers stopped abruptly in front of the house, and 4 police officers got out, 2 of them, with their hands on their hips near their weapons. The officer who seemed to be in charge, a tall man with a graying mustache, walked quickly to the gate. "Ma'am, please step away from the house," he ordered in a firm but not hostile voice. "I need you to take the child to a safe place." But this is my mother-in-law's house," I stammered, confused and scared. "My husband is inside." The officer exchanged a meaningful look with his colleagues. "What is your husband's name, ma'am?" "Richard Anderson." "What's going on? Why are the police here?" The officer gestured to 2 of his colleagues, who immediately positioned themselves on either side of the house. Then he addressed me in a softer tone. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Commander Grant. We need you and your son to step back for safety reasons. Could you wait at Mrs. Sarah's house? We'll need to talk to you later." Mrs. Sarah immediately took my shoulder. "Come on, Anna. Let's go to my house. Petey can have some hot chocolate while we wait." As if in a dream, or rather a nightmare, I let myself be guided across the street carrying Petey. He clung to my neck, scared by the situation he didn't understand. From Mrs. Sarah's porch, we watched the police surround the house. The commander said something through a megaphone that I couldn't quite make out. There was a moment of tense silence, and then, with a quick, coordinated movement, 2 officers forced the front door. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the quiet street, making Petey tighten his grip on my neck. The police entered quickly, weapons drawn. "What's going on, Mrs. Sarah?" I asked in a trembling voice. The older woman sighed heavily, guiding me inside her house. "It started last night. After settling Petey in the kitchen with a cup of chocolate and some animal crackers," she told me. "I heard screams coming from Beatrice's house. Terrible woman's screams." She shuddered visibly. Then glass breaking. And then silence. I felt my blood run cold. "And you didn't call the police yesterday?" "I was scared," she admitted, ashamed. "We live in a small town, Anna. We're not used to violence." I thought maybe it was just a fight, but then very early this morning I saw your husband carrying something to his car's trunk, something big, heavy. It looked like a very large suitcase. My mind refused to process what she was implying. Richard. My Richard. The man who kindly shooed spiders out of the bathroom for me because he knew I was afraid of them. The man who sang lullabies to Petey even when he was exhausted from work. No, it was impossible. "He drove off," Mrs. Sarah continued, "and came back an hour later without the suitcase. That's when I decided to call the police. I told them everything I saw. They told me to stay in my house and let them know if I saw him again." I sat heavily on Mrs. Sarah's couch, feeling as if the world was crumbling around me. Nothing made sense. Why would Richard lie about his mother, who was the woman Mrs. Sarah had seen? And most disturbing of all, what was in that heavy suitcase? My thoughts were interrupted by a firm knock on the door. Mrs. Sarah went to open it, and a moment later, Commander Grant entered the living room. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes, compassion maybe, that made my stomach sink even further. "Mrs. Anderson," he began, sitting in the armchair across from me. "We need to talk. It's about your husband." Commander Grant took off his hat and placed it on the coffee table, a gesture that seemed old-fashioned, but carried a certain solemnity. His eyes, tired but kind, met mine. "Mrs. Anderson, what I'm about to tell you is difficult, but I need you to stay calm, especially for your son." I nodded mechanically, my body numb with anxiety. "Your husband is not in the house," he began. "The house is empty." "Empty," I repeated, confused. "But his car is outside." "Yes, the car is there, but the house was completely searched. There's no one inside." I tried to process this. If Richard wasn't there, where could he be? And why would he leave the car? "Commander, I don't understand. My husband told me his mother was sick, that he came to take care of her. But Mrs. Sarah says my mother-in-law is in Chicago." "Yes, we confirmed that," the commander said. "We contacted Mrs. Beatrice's sister in Chicago. Your mother-in-law is there visiting. She left 5 days ago." 5 days, even before Richard told me she was sick. But then, why would my husband tell me she was sick? The commander sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of many unpleasant truths he'd had to deliver over the years. "Mrs. Anderson, there's more. We found disturbing evidence in the house. I'd like you to come with me to take a look, but..." He glanced meaningfully toward the kitchen, where Petey was still sitting. "I'll stay with the boy," Mrs. Sarah offered immediately. "He can watch cartoons on TV while you talk." After settling Petey in front of the TV with his cookies and hot chocolate, I followed the commander outside. The street was now full of curious onlookers, kept at a respectable distance by 2 police officers. Another officer was taking pictures of Richard's car. "We're examining the vehicle," the commander explained, "looking for evidence." Evidence of what? I wanted to ask, but something held me back. Maybe the fear of the answer. When we entered the house, I was immediately hit by a strong chemical smell, like cleaning products mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. The living room, which had always been a cozy and tidy space, a reflection of Mrs. Beatrice's meticulous personality, was in disarray. The sofa had been moved, cushions were scattered on the floor, and a ceramic vase my mother-in-law adored was shattered in a corner. "What happened here?" I whispered, looking around with growing horror. "We believe there was a struggle," the commander replied. "According to Mrs. Sarah's account, a woman was seen entering this house with your husband the day before yesterday, and last night screams and sounds of breaking objects were heard." I took a few steps into the center of the room, feeling my legs tremble. My eyes were drawn to a dark stain on the hardwood floor, a stain someone had tried to clean but not completely. "Is that blood?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The commander nodded gravely. "Yes, and there's more in the guest room, this way." He led me down the familiar hallway to the small room where Petey always slept when we visited. The door was ajar, and an officer was crouched near the bed examining something on the floor with a flashlight. Unlike the living room, the room was impeccably tidy. The bed was made perfectly, the floor visibly clean, every surface polished. It was an unnatural, almost obsessive cleanliness. "Notice how this room is different from the rest of the house?" the commander asked. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. "It was cleaned recently. Very well cleaned, but not completely." He pointed to the officer with the flashlight. "We're using an ultraviolet light. It reveals traces of blood that aren't visible to the naked eye." The officer turned on the special light, and before my horrified eyes, the apparently clean floor revealed ghostly stains, a splatter pattern that someone had desperately tried to erase. "There's more in the bathroom," the commander continued. "Someone tried to clean up a considerable amount of blood." My mind refused to accept what I was seeing, what I was hearing. This couldn't be my husband, the father of my son. There had to be some mistake, some explanation. "Commander," I began, my voice trembling, "there must be a mistake. Richard wouldn't. He would never—" "Mrs. Anderson," he interrupted gently, "there's something else you need to know. Your husband has been under investigation for months." "Investigation for what?" "For financial fraud. Richard Anderson and his partner Christine Mendez are suspected of running a pyramid scheme through the investment firm where he works. We're talking about millions of dollars, diverted from investors. Shaz. Fraud millions." I felt as if the floor was disappearing from under me. "No," I shook my head. "Richard is a financial manager, yes, but he's honest. He always has been. We live modestly. We don't have luxuries." "The diverted funds didn't go to flashy personal expenses," the commander explained. "They were transferred to offshore accounts. We suspect your husband and Ms. Mendez were planning to flee the country with the money." Ms. Mendez, the woman Mrs. Sarah saw. I remembered what she had said, that the woman looked scared, that Richard dragged her inside the house. "And that woman," I asked haltingly, "is she the person whose blood is on the floor?" The commander exchanged a look with the officer who was still examining the room. "That's what we suspect, yes. The amount of blood is consistent with a serious injury, possibly fatal." Fatal. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. "And you think Richard—" I couldn't finish the sentence. It was too absurd, too terrible. "Mrs. Anderson." The commander placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "There's one more thing. We found a diary under the bed. It apparently belongs to Christine Mendez. The last entry is from yesterday. In it, she writes about discovering that your husband planned to betray her, to keep all the money for himself. She confronted him, and he became violent. Violent, a word I had never associated with Richard. In 7 years of marriage, I had never seen him lose control. I had never seen him raise his voice, let alone his hand. How could this be the same man? I staggered to the edge of the bed and sat down, unable to stand any longer. My head was spinning with the amount of information, each piece more devastating than the last. "And the suitcase?" I asked almost involuntarily, remembering Mrs. Sarah's account. The commander hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell me. "We're looking for it. Your husband was seen leaving with the suitcase this morning, driving out of town. He returned an hour later without it. We have teams searching the region, especially isolated areas like the hills or the reservoir." A shiver ran through me as I understood the implication. They were looking for a body. Christine Mendez's body. At that moment, the officer in the room stood up abruptly. "Commander, we found something." He was holding a small, shiny object with tweezers. It was a delicate gold bracelet with small blue stones. I had never seen it before. "It's not mine," I said automatically, "and it's not Mrs. Beatrice's either. It probably belongs to Christine Mendez." The commander nodded, gesturing for the officer to put the evidence in a plastic bag. My phone suddenly rang, making me jump. I pulled it out of my pocket with trembling hands. An international number was on the screen. "It might be my mother-in-law," I said, showing the phone to the commander. He nodded. "Answer it, and put it on speaker, please." With my heart pounding, I answered. "Hello. Anna, thank God." Mrs. Beatrice's voice sounded distant but clearly agitated. "Are you okay? And Petey, where are you?" "We're fine, Mrs. Beatrice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We're at your house, actually." There was a confused silence on the other end. "At my house? How, Anna? I'm in Chicago at my sister's." "I know," I replied, feeling the tears finally start to fall. "I just found out. Richard told me you were sick, that he came to take care of you." "Sick me?" Her voice went up an octave. "No, Anna, I'm perfectly fine. Richard called me this morning frantic. He told me—" Her voice broke. "He told me that you and Petey had been kidnapped. He said he needed money for the ransom, that I needed to transfer my entire life savings to an account he gave me. Kidnapped." The lie was becoming more elaborate, more terrible. The commander gently took the phone from my hand. "Mrs. Beatrice, this is Commander Grant with the state police. Your daughter-in-law and grandson are safe with us. There has been no kidnapping. Your son lied to you." "Oh, my God," Mrs. Beatrice whispered. "What is happening? Where is Richard?" "That's what we're trying to find out, ma'am. Please do not transfer any money to the account your son gave you. We are in the middle of an investigation that may involve serious crimes." After a few more assurances that Petey and I were really okay and a promise to keep her informed, the commander ended the call. I sat on the edge of the bed, silent, trying to process everything. My husband, the man I loved, the father of my son, was a criminal, a fraudster, and possibly a murderer. "What happens now?" I finally asked, my voice sounding strangely empty even to my own ears. "Now," the commander replied, "we need to find your husband before he tries to run again. And for that, Mrs. Anderson, we need your help." Sarah's living room had been transformed into a makeshift police command center. Maps were spread over the coffee table, radios crackled with coded messages, and officers moved in and out, always with serious expressions. Petey was asleep in the guest room, exhausted by the stress and confusion of the day. Sitting on the couch with an untouched cup of tea in front of me, I listened as Commander Grant explained the plan. "We have reason to believe your husband will be back," he said, tapping a point on the map of the small town. "He left the car at his mother's house, probably so he wouldn't raise suspicion. And now that he's asked Mrs. Beatrice for money, he'll want to know if she made the transfer." "And you want to use that as bait," I stated, feeling a strange detachment, as if I were talking about a stranger, not my son's father. "Exactly," the commander confirmed. "Mrs. Beatrice will call him and say the bank is having trouble with the international transfer, that they require a representative to make the withdrawal in person here in the States. And you think he'll believe that?" "Desperate people believe what they want to believe," the commander replied, "and your husband must be very desperate right now." The thought of Richard, my Richard being described as desperate, was surreal. In our life together, he had always been the definition of calm and stability. When Petey was born prematurely and spent 2 weeks in the NICU, it was Richard who held it together, who comforted me when I was falling apart. How could this be the same man who was now running from the police, possibly with blood on his hands? And where will this trap be set? I asked, forcing myself back to the present to focus on the plan. The commander pointed to another spot on the map just outside the town limits. "Here, the old abandoned distillery. It's isolated enough for him to feel safe, but it also gives us room to position teams around without being detected." I looked at the map, trying to visualize the operation. The abandoned distillery was about 3 miles from town on the highway leading back to the city. It was a strategic spot, far enough to seem discreet, but not so isolated as to arouse suspicion. "And what will my role be in this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The commander exchanged a look with one of his officers before answering. "Mrs. Anderson, I won't lie to you. Your presence could be a crucial element. If your husband sees you, it might disarm him, make him lower his guard." "You want me to be the bait," I translated bluntly. "We won't put you in danger," he assured me hastily. "You would stay in an observation van at a safe distance. You would only appear after the capture when he is already contained." I thought of Petey sleeping innocently in the next room, with no idea that his world was about to fall apart. I thought of Mrs. Beatrice, who had welcomed me like a daughter, now facing the terrible revelation about the son she had raised. And I thought of Christine Mendez, a woman I had never met, but whose blood stained the floor of my mother-in-law's house. "I'll do it." I decided, my voice surprisingly firm. "But on one condition. Petey stays here with Mrs. Sarah. He can't see any of this." The commander nodded, relieved. "Of course, we had already considered that. We'll leave 2 officers here for your protection as well." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Sarah set up a room for Petey where he slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that had engulfed our world. I watched him for a few minutes before leaving his little face relaxed in sleep, his small fingers clutching the stuffed rabbit he had brought from home. How would I ever explain to him that his father, his hero, was a criminal? How would I protect his heart from the pain that was sure to come? In the living room, Commander Grant was on the phone with Mrs. Beatrice, giving her precise instructions on what to tell Richard. She would call. She would say she was facing difficulties with the international transfer, that the bank required a local representative to authorize the withdrawal. "Are you understanding, Mrs. Beatrice?" the commander asked. "It's crucial that you sound natural, that he believes you're really trying to help him get the ransom money." On the other end of the line, I heard my mother-in-law's shaky voice. Even at a distance, even after discovering her son's lies, she was still the strong woman I admired. "I understand perfectly, Commander. I will do my part. For Anna and my grandson." When he hung up, the commander turned to me. "She'll call him in 15 minutes. If he takes the bait, we'll have about an hour to get in position at the abandoned distillery." I nodded mechanically, still trying to process everything that was happening. A part of me still expected to wake up at any moment to find out this was all just a terrible nightmare. But the weight of the phone in my hand, the smell of coffee coming from Mrs. Sarah's kitchen, the constant murmur of the police radios, it was all too real. "And if he doesn't show up?" I asked suddenly. The commander exchanged a look with one of his officers before answering. "Then we keep looking. We have teams searching the entire region, checking highways, hotels, motels. He won't get far, Mrs. Anderson, especially if he thinks he can get his mother's money." 15 minutes later, the commander's phone rang. It was Mrs. Beatrice, ready to make the call to Richard. Everyone in the room fell silent as the commander put the call on speaker. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just when I thought it would go to voicemail, my husband's familiar voice came on the line. "Mom, did you get the money?" It was Richard's voice, but at the same time it wasn't. There was a coldness, a hardness I had never perceived before. Or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't want to see it. "Richard, son." Mrs. Beatrice's voice trembled genuinely. She didn't need to fake the desperation. "I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. I went to the bank here in Chicago, but they said a transfer of that size to an unknown account would raise suspicions, that they'd need special authorization." "We don't have time for bureaucracy, Mom." Richard interrupted, his voice tense. "They gave me a deadline. If I don't deliver the money—" "I know, son, I know. That's why the bank manager suggested another solution. They have a representative in the States, in our town. He can authorize the withdrawal directly without all that red tape. He'll be there with the cash." There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Richard weighing, evaluating the risks. Finally, he spoke. "Where would this meeting be?" "At the old distillery at the end of the main road. The manager said it's a discreet place where no one would see the transaction." Another silence, longer this time. "When?" he finally asked. "This afternoon, at 5. He'll be alone with a black briefcase. You need to go alone too, Richard. He was very clear about that. And the money will all be there, everything I asked for. Yes, son, all my retirement money, my life savings. But it's worth it, if it brings Anna and Petey back safely. The mention of our names made my stomach churn. How could he use the people he supposedly loved like this? All right, Richard said after a pause. I'll meet him. But if this is a trap, Mom, if anything goes wrong, it's not a trap, son. Mrs. Beatrice's voice broke. It's your mother trying to help. Please. Just bring my grandson and my daughter-in-law back safely. The call ended. Everyone in the room let out the breath they were unconsciously holding. He took the bait, the commander announced, already standing up and signaling to the other officers. Let's get ready. The next hour was a blur of activity. Unmarked police cars left at staggered intervals so as not to raise suspicion. Bulletproof vests were distributed. Radios were checked. An officer was chosen for the role of the bank representative, a middle-aged man with a trustworthy appearance who would be positioned in the center of the abandoned distillery next to a black briefcase filled with cut paper and a few real bills on top. Before leaving, I went to the room where Petey was sleeping and kissed his forehead. Mommy will be back soon, I whispered. I love you more than anything. Mrs. Sarah was in the doorway watching. He'll be fine, she assured me, putting a kind hand on my shoulder. I'll take care of him as if he were my own grandson. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Sarah. Go, she said firmly. Do what you have to do. We'll rebuild life later. The sun was beginning to set when we arrived at the outskirts of the abandoned distillery. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, a beauty that contrasted cruelly with the darkness of the situation. The old distillery, closed for over a decade, stood like an industrial ghost against the horizon. Faded concrete walls, broken windows, a rusty gate hanging on hinges that looked like they were about to give way. I was positioned in an observation van parked about 200 yards from the distillery, hidden by a row of cacti and trees. Inside the van, monitors showed images from cameras strategically placed around and inside the distillery. The officer disguised as a bank representative was already in position in the center of what was once the main lobby of the distillery, a black briefcase by his side. He'll be here soon, Commander Grant muttered, sitting next to me in the van. Stay calm, Mrs. Anderson. Everything will be fine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that after this terrible day, I could start to rebuild some kind of life for Petey and me. But how do you rebuild on such deep ruins? Movement, one of the officers in the van announced, pointing to one of the monitors. My heart leaped as I saw a lone figure approaching cautiously through the side entrance of the distillery. Even on the grainy security camera images, even with the motorcycle helmet covering his face, I would recognize Richard anywhere. The man I loved, the man who betrayed not only me, but himself. Everything I believed he was. He moved like a predator, cautious, calculating. He stopped a safe distance from the disguised officer watching. His right hand was hidden inside his jacket. He's armed, the commander muttered, bringing the radio to his lips. Teams in position. Suspect is armed. The disguised officer gestured towards the briefcase, trying to lure Richard closer. Are you from the bank? Richard asked, his voice muffled by the helmet. Yes, sir, the officer replied calmly. I have the money here as agreed with your mother. Richard took a step forward, then stopped, still wary. Show me the money first. The officer bent down and began to open the briefcase. That's when the commander gave the signal. Now, he ordered into the radio. In seconds, powerful lights flashed on from all sides, flooding the abandoned distillery. Police officers emerged from their hiding places, weapons aimed. Police, stop, hands on your head! The shouts echoed off the concrete walls. Richard froze for an instant. Then, with a quick movement, he pulled a gun from inside his jacket and fired into the air. Get back! He shouted, backing towards the exit. No! I whispered, horrified to see my husband, the father of my son, transformed into this desperate, dangerous stranger. Richard tried to run, but he was already surrounded. One of the officers fired, hitting the tire of the motorcycle that was parked at the entrance. The sound of the shot echoed through the abandoned distillery, followed by the pop of the tire. Unbalanced, Richard stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. The gun slipped from his hands, sliding across the dirty concrete. In seconds, 3 officers were on him, forcing his arms behind his back and cuffing him. "Richard Anderson, you are under arrest for fraud, suspicion of attempted murder, extortion, and illegal possession of a firearm," one of the officers announced as he removed the helmet from Richard's head. For the first time in days, I saw the face of the man who had shared my bed, my life. There was no longer a mask of kindness, of stability. His eyes were wild furious, his jaw tense in an expression I had never seen before. "We're taking him to the station," Commander Grant said, standing up and signaling to the driver of the van. "Do you want to see him now, or would you prefer to wait until we're at the station?" I hesitated for only a moment. "Now," I decided. "I need to look him in the eye. I need to understand. If there's anything to understand." The commander nodded. "Let's go then." When the van stopped a few feet from where Richard was being lifted off the ground by the officers, I felt a wave of contradictory emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, even a painful remnant of love. This man had been my world for 7 years, the devoted father of my son, or so I thought. I got out of the van slowly, my legs trembling. Richard, now standing flanked by officers, holding his arms firmly, turned his head at the sound of the door opening. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Anna," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. What are you doing here?" I approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. I studied his face, searching for any trace of the man I thought I knew. I found nothing. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "Surprise right, Petey and I came to visit your sick mother." Understanding slowly replaced the confusion on his face. His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Anna, honey, this is a misunderstanding." He tried his voice, suddenly soft, persuasive. The same voice he used to convince Petey to eat his vegetables to calm me down after a hard day. "I can explain everything. I'm working on a secret operation trying to catch criminals within the company. I had to lie to protect you, to protect Petey." It was such a transparent, desperate lie that I almost laughed. Almost. "Enough lies, Richard," I said, keeping my voice low, aware of the officers around us. "I know about the fraud. I know about Christine Mendez. I saw the blood on the floor of your mother's house." The change in his face was instant and terrifying. The mask of concern crumbled, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You don't know anything," he hissed. "I know enough. I know you've been lying to me for years. I know you used my name and Petey's name to try to extort your own mother. I know." My voice broke for a moment. "I know you might have killed a woman and hidden her body." Richard didn't deny it. He showed no remorse. Instead, he looked at me with a coldness that made me tremble. "You were always so naive, Anna," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "So easy to fool. Yes, honey, I'm working late. Of course, love, it's just a business trip." And you believed all of it. Without questioning, without doubting. Every word was like a stab, but I held my ground. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. "You're right, Richard. I was naive. I believed in you because I loved you, because I trusted you. My only crime was believing that the man I married was who he said he was." Before Richard could answer, a commotion arose at the entrance of the distillery. Police officers were running towards a figure staggering inside, a woman in torn, dirty clothes, one arm wrapped in a bloody rag. "Commander," one of the officers shouted, "we found her on the road trying to get here." The woman lifted her face, revealing bruises and cuts, but eyes that burned with determination. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair that must have once been elegant, now matted and dirty. "Christine," the commander whispered beside me. Christine Mendez was alive. The effect on Richard was immediate and violent. He thrashed against the officers holding him, his face contorted in fury. "You!" he screamed. "How is that possible? You're supposed to be dead." The officers restrained him with difficulty, while others ran to help Christine, who looked like she was about to collapse. One of them offered water, another called for an ambulance on the radio. "You failed again, Richard," Christine said weakly, but with surprising toughness. "Just like always." The commander gently guided me back to the van, away from the chaotic scene. "Let's go to the station, Mrs. Anderson. There we can get a better understanding of what happened." Before the van door closed, I looked one last time at the man who had been my husband. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Rage, maybe. Or something colder and more calculating. This stranger, I realized with a chill, he had slept next to me for 7 years. He had held our newborn son. He had promised to love me until death do us part. And all that time, I never really knew him. The police station was an old building in the center of the small town with peeling walls and worn furniture that had seen better days. Sitting in an uncomfortable chair in Commander Grant's office, with a cup of bad coffee cooling in front of me, I waited for Christine Mendez to be brought in after receiving first aid from the paramedics. "She refused to go to the hospital until she talked to us," the commander explained, entering the room after checking on the situation. "The wounds are serious, but they don't appear to be life-threatening. She's a strong woman." I nodded silently, still trying to process everything. Christine Mendez, the woman I had automatically hated hours ago, the other woman in my husband's life. Now I felt only a strange connection to her, both victims of the same man, albeit in different ways. "And Richard?" I asked. "He's in the interrogation room. He asked for a lawyer, which is his right. But with the evidence we have plus Ms. Mendez's testimony, there's not much room for a defense." The door opened, and 2 officers entered escorting Christine. She looked better than she had at the distillery. Her face had been cleaned, revealing bruises in various stages of healing, and her arm was now properly bandaged. But it was her eyes that caught my attention, dark, intense, with a determination that seemed to overcome the physical pain. She sat across from me on the other side of the table, and for a moment we just looked at each other. 2 women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man. "I'm Anna," I said, finally extending my hand out of impulse. She looked at my outstretched hand, hesitated for a second. Then she shook it briefly. "Christine." Her voice was stronger than I expected, with a slight accent I couldn't place. The commander cleared his throat, turning on a recorder on the table. "Ms. Mendez, if you're feeling well enough, I'd like you to tell us exactly what happened at Mrs. Beatrice Anderson's house." Christine took a deep breath, glancing quickly at me before beginning her story. "I met Richard 3 years ago at the investment firm where I worked. I was a financial consultant specializing in bringing in new investors." She paused, wetting her dry lips. "At first it was just a professional relationship. Richard had brilliant ideas. He knew how to make money grow. I had the contacts, the ability to win clients' trust." "When did you start defrauding investors?" the commander asked. Christine looked down for a moment. "It started small. A diversion here, another there. Then it grew. Richard was convincing. He said the clients would never even notice, that it was money they would never miss." As she spoke, I tried to reconcile this image with the Richard I knew, the man who questioned whether we should really accept the wrong change a cashier had given us, the man who regularly donated to Petey's school coat drive. "In the last year, things started to get complicated," Christine continued. "Some clients started asking questions, demanding detailed statements. We realized it was only a matter of time until everything came to light." "And that's when you decided to flee," the commander completed. "Yes. Richard suggested we leave the country, start a new life abroad. We had transferred most of the money to offshore accounts. Everything was ready." Christine stopped, her eyes fixed on me. "He told me he was single, that he had no family. I only found out about you and your son later, after it was already too late." I felt a lump in my throat. Richard hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to her, too. We were both just pieces in his elaborate game. "What happened at his mother's house?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Christine closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. "When things started to get dangerous in the city, Richard suggested we hide out at his mother's house. He said she was out of town, that the house would be empty. He said we'd stay there for a few days until we got the final documents to leave the country. She touched the bandage on her arm lightly before continuing. The first night everything seemed normal. Richard was tense, but I attributed it to the situation. The second night, while he was in the shower, I checked his phone to review some transfers we had made. That's when I saw everything. "What did you see?" the commander asked. "Messages to a contact in Cancun, arranging a single plane ticket, not two, just one, in Richard's name, and transfers. All our joint accounts had been emptied, the money moved to an account only he had access to." Her eyes met mine. "There were also messages to you, and pictures of your son." I felt my heart constrict. Even while planning to abandon his family, Richard kept up the facade, this double life. "When I confronted him," Christine continued, her voice lower now, "he transformed. I had never seen him like that before. His eyes were the eyes of a stranger, cold, calculating." She took a shaky breath. "He took my perfume bottle and hit me over the head. I fell. He started to strangle me, saying I was a problem, that I should have never meddled in his business." "How did you survive?" I asked, horrified by the violence of the man who had shared my bed. "I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was alone, covered in blood. I managed to drag myself out of the house, to the tool shed in the back. I spent the night there, drifting in and out of consciousness. The next morning, I saw Richard loading a large suitcase into the car. I thought—" She shuddered visibly. "When he left, I tried to get help, but I was too weak. I spent the day hidden, trying to regain my strength." "That's when I heard the sirens. I saw the police." The commander asked a few more questions, details about the fraud, about the escape plan. Christine answered everything with surprising clarity for someone who had been through such an ordeal. When she finished her story, she looked exhausted, but somehow also lighter, as if sharing the truth had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching into the pocket of her torn pants. She pulled out a small USB drive. "All the proof is here. Records of the fraud, names of the affected clients, details of the offshore accounts. I always keep backups of everything. Richard thought I trusted him blindly." A bitter smile touched her lips. That was his mistake. The commander carefully took the device, placing it in an evidence bag. "This will be extremely helpful to the case, Ms. Mendez. Now we really need to get you to the hospital to properly care for those wounds." As the officers helped Christine up, she paused and looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for everything. I didn't know about you, about your son. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," I replied, and I realized it was true. The blame was entirely Richard's. When Christine was escorted out by the officers, the commander turned to me. "You should get some rest, too. It's been a hard day. We can continue this tomorrow." "Before I go," I said, a crucial question still weighing on my mind. "What was in the large suitcase Richard loaded into the car? If it wasn't Christine—" The commander sighed. "We don't know for sure yet. Teams are searching the area where he was seen stopping the car. But if I had to guess, I'd say it was evidence of the fraud. Incriminating documents, maybe even cash. Something he didn't want us to find in the house." I nodded, a strange relief washing over me. At least Richard wasn't a murderer, even if he had tried to become one. "Can I see him?" I asked suddenly. "Before I go, I need to look him in the eye one last time." The commander hesitated. "He's already asked for a lawyer. Technically, we shouldn't allow visits right now." "Please," I insisted. "Not as a visitor, as his wife. I promise I won't interfere with the case. I won't ask questions about the investigation. I need this closure." After a moment of consideration, the commander nodded. 5 minutes, and an officer will be present the entire time." The interrogation room was small and devoid of personality. A metal table, 2 chairs, gray walls. Richard was sitting on one side of the table, his hands cuffed in front of him. When I walked in, he looked up, and for a fleeting instant, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even shame. but it was quickly replaced by the mask of indifference he now wore. I sat across from him, aware of the officer standing by the door and the camera in the corner of the room. For a long moment we just looked at each other. This man, who was once the center of my world, now looked like a stranger. "Why?" I finally asked, the only word I could form. Richard tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. "Why? What exactly? Why the fraud? Why Christine? Why lie to you? All of it. Any of it. I want to understand." He sighed, a sound that seemed almost genuine in its weariness. "You wouldn't understand, Anna. You'd never understand what it's like to feel trapped, limited, to look at your future and see only mediocrity. A mediocre job, a mediocre house, a mediocre life." "Our life wasn't mediocre," I replied, feeling a stab of anger for the first time. "We had a home, we had a son, we had love. What more could you want?" A cold smile touched his lips. "More, always more. You were never ambitious, Anna. You were content with so little. I wanted more from life, more money, more power, more freedom. And you were willing to destroy everything to get that, including your own son." The mention of Petey seemed to affect him in a way my other words hadn't. For a moment his mask dropped, revealing something that looked almost like genuine regret. "Petey was never suffering," he said, his voice low. "I always loved him, in my own way." "In your own way?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your way included using your son as a pawn in a scheme to extort your own mother." "What kind of love is that, Richard?" He didn't answer, his eyes dropping to the table between us. "And us?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Did you love me, in your own way?" Richard looked up, meeting my gaze. For a moment I thought I saw a flash of the man I had known, the man who made me laugh on our first date, who held my hand during labor, who danced with me in the kitchen on anniversaries. "Yes," he said finally, "but it wasn't enough." 3 simple words that summed it all up. It wasn't enough. Our love, our family, our life together. None of it was enough for Richard, and it never would be. I stood up slowly. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to ask. The Richard I knew or thought I knew was long gone, if he had ever truly existed at all. "Goodbye, Richard," I said simply, turning to leave. "Anna," he called when I was at the door. I stopped without turning around. "Take good care of Petey." I almost laughed at the irony, as if I needed the reminder, as if I hadn't always been the one taking care of our son while he lived his double life. "I always have," I replied, and walked out without looking back. Commander Grant was waiting for me in the hallway. "Are you all right?" I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Yes, I'm ready to go back to my son now." When we returned to Mrs. Sarah's house, it was late at night. Petey was still sleeping, oblivious to the hurricane that had ravaged our lives. I sat on the edge of the bed where he slept, watching his peaceful little face, his long eyelashes, his chest rising and falling in steady breaths. How would I protect this little heart from what was to come? Mrs. Sarah appeared in the doorway holding a steaming cup of tea. "I thought you might need this," she said, gently handing me the cup. "Thank you," I murmured gratefully, accepting the hot tea. "For everything." She sat beside me on the bed, looking at Petey fondly. "He's strong, like his mother. He's going to get through this." How do I tell him? How do I explain that his father is never coming home, that everything we knew was a lie? Mrs. Sarah sighed, a sound heavy with wisdom gained through many years and many sorrows. "You don't tell him all at once, not a 5-year-old. You tell him what he can understand, what he needs to know. That Daddy did something wrong and he needs to be away for a while, that it has nothing to do with him, that it's not his fault. And when he gets older, when he starts asking more questions, then you tell him more, as he's ready to hear it. The truth is a weight, Anna. You don't put too heavy a weight on shoulders that are too small." She touched my hand gently. "But that's for tomorrow. Tonight you rest. you get your strength back." I nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally overwhelm me. I finished my tea and lay down next to Petey, curling around him carefully so as not to wake him. His warmth, his familiar smell were like a balm to my shattered soul. I didn't think I would be able to sleep, but the physical and emotional exhaustion soon pulled me under into a deep and dreamless sleep. I woke the next morning to Petey poking my face. Mommy, wake up. Where's Grandma? We came to see Grandma, remember?" Reality hit me in a painful wave. For a moment, I almost wished it had all been just a terrible nightmare I was waking up from. But the unfamiliar room, the absence of Richard, the worried expression on Mrs. Sarah's face in the doorway, all confirmed that the nightmare was real. "Petey, sweetheart." I began sitting up and pulling him onto my lap. "Grandma isn't here. She's on a trip, visiting Aunt Margaret in Chicago. Remember her?" Petey pouted. "But Daddy said she was sick. That's why he came to take care of her." I took a deep breath. It would start now then, the small truths that would replace the big lies. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Petey. Daddy got confused. Grandma is fine. She's on a trip. But now we need to go back home." "What about Daddy? Are we going to wait for him?" I exchanged a look with Mrs. Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Daddy isn't coming back with us right now, honey. He needs to take care of some things. He's going to be away for a while." Petey's little face crumpled in confusion and sadness. "Why is he mad at me?" "No, sweetheart, no." I hugged him tight, feeling tears burn in my eyes. "This has nothing to do with you. Daddy loves you very much. But he did some things that were wrong, and now he needs to fix them. Like when you break a toy and you need to fix it, understand?" Petey nodded slowly, though I knew he didn't fully comprehend. How could he? I barely understood it myself. After a simple breakfast prepared by Mrs. Sarah, we packed our few things. Commander Grant showed up to drive us back home, as my car would have to stay for the investigation. "We can stop by the station first," he suggested discreetly, while Petey was distracted saying goodbye to Mrs. Sarah's cat. "There are some papers you need to sign, and we need to discuss the next steps." At the station, while Petey colored pictures in the waiting room under the watchful eye of a kind female officer, I was informed about what to expect in the coming days and weeks. "Your husband will be formally charged with financial fraud, attempted murder extortion, and illegal possession of a firearm," the commander explained. "With the evidence we have, plus Christine Mendez's testimony and the USB drive, the case is quite solid. He will likely face a long sentence." I nodded mechanically, signing the documents that were placed in front of me. "And the victims of the fraud," I asked. "Will there be any way to recover their money?" "We're working on that. Some of the money may be recovered from the offshore accounts, but it will take time, and unfortunately, it's likely that not all of it will be recovered." A fresh wave of shame hit me. Even though I hadn't consciously participated in the fraud, I was Richard's wife. In the eyes of many, I would be an accomplice, or at least negligent. "You shouldn't blame yourself," the commander said, as if reading my thoughts. "All the evidence indicates that you had no knowledge of your husband's criminal activities. You are also a victim in this story." We left the station with heavy hearts, but with a plan. We would go back to our house, a house that now felt like a stage set a backdrop where Richard had played his role of devoted husband and father. I would gather our documents, I would contact a lawyer, I would start the divorce proceedings. Then we would probably have to move, start over somewhere else, away from the pitying looks, the whispers, the inevitable questions. During the drive back, Petey fell asleep in the back seat of the police cruiser. I watched the landscape pass by the window, fields and small towns that seemed to belong to another world. A parallel reality where normal families lived normal lives without devastating secrets, without unthinkable betrayals. "Do you have family who can help you?" the commander asked as he drove. "My parents live down south, almost 1,000 miles away in Florida. I have a sister in the city. I'll contact them. I'll tell them what happened." The thought of making those calls, of saying the terrible truths I had discovered out loud, made my stomach churn. "And Richard's mother, Mrs. Beatrice, she said she's coming back from Chicago as soon as she can. I'm worried about her." This is going to destroy her." "She seems like a strong woman," the commander commented. "Like you." I looked at him, surprised by the comment. "Strong, I don't feel strong. I feel broken." "Even so, you faced one of the worst betrayals possible. You discovered that the man you shared your life with was a criminal, maybe even a near murderer, and still you're here, planning the next step, thinking about how to protect your son, worrying about your mother-in-law. That is strength, Mrs. Anderson." His words touched something inside me. Maybe he was right. Maybe just surviving this, just continuing to breathe, to function, was a form of strength. Not the flashy, confident strength I always imagined, but a quiet strength born of necessity and love for my son. When we finally arrived at our house, my house now, it was already dark. The lights were off the house, silent and cold. Petey, still sleepy, clung to my neck as I carried him inside. "Thank you for everything, Commander," I said, pausing at the door. "I'll be in touch," he replied. "And remember, you're not alone in this." I nodded, grateful for the support, and entered the house, closing the door behind me. There, in the silence of our living room, looking at the family photos on the wall, frozen smiles in moments that now seemed to belong to strangers, I finally felt the full reality of my situation. The man I loved, the father of my son, was a criminal, a liar, a stranger. Our life together had been built on lies, and now I was alone, facing an uncertain future, trying to protect my son from truths that even I couldn't fully comprehend. But as I watched Petey fall asleep in his bed, surrounded by his favorite toys, I realized that despite everything, there was still truth in my life. My love for my son was real. The strength I would find to move forward would be real. And maybe one day I would find peace again. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. With that silent promise, I lay down next to Petey and finally allowed the tears to come. Not just for what I had lost, but also for what I still had, for what was still mine. 6 months passed like a fever dream. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, as I fought to rebuild some kind of normalcy for Petey and me. We moved into a smaller apartment closer to his school. I went back to work as a teacher, a profession I had given up when Petey was born. Mrs. Beatrice returned from Chicago, and after selling her house, unable to live with the memories of what had happened there, she moved into a small apartment a few blocks from ours. It was a period of painful adjustments and even more painful discoveries. The extent of Richard and Christine's fraud was greater than anyone had initially imagined. Dozens of families had lost their life savings retirement funds, money saved for their children's education. Each new revelation was like a wound reopened, each newspaper headline a reminder of the man I thought I knew. Petey asked about his father almost every day at first. "When is Daddy coming home? Why can't we visit him? Doesn't he love us anymore?" Each question was a dagger in my heart. Following the advice of a child therapist, we began to see I answered with simple, age-appropriate truths, always reaffirming that his father's love for him was real, even if his actions had been wrong. Gradually, the questions lessened. Richard's absence became part of our new normal. Petey adapted with the surprising resilience that children possess. I, on the other hand, still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, dreaming of the blood on the floor of Mrs. Beatrice's house, of the heavy suitcase Richard had loaded into the car. The trial began on a rainy autumn day. The gray sky seemed to reflect the seriousness of the occasion. The courtroom was packed, journalists, victims of the fraud, curious onlookers. I sat in the front row next to Mrs. Beatrice. Her face, always so lively and expressive, seemed to have aged a decade in 6 months. But her eyes held a quiet determination, a silent strength that I had learned to admire even more. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, squeezing my hand as the officers announced the judge's entrance. When the side doors opened and Richard was brought in, I felt my heart quicken. He was wearing a gray suit, very different from the prison uniform he had worn the last time I saw him. His hair was carefully combed, his appearance impeccable as always. For a fleeting moment, he looked like the man I married, elegant, controlled, confident. Our eyes met briefly. Something passed through his. Regret, maybe, or just calculation. I looked away, unable to hold that connection any longer. The prosecutor stood up, a tall, thin man with thick-framed glasses. His voice echoed through the silent courtroom as he detailed the charges. Aggravated financial fraud, attempted murder, extortion, illegal possession of a firearm. This case, he declared, looking directly at the jurors, is not just about stolen money, although millions were diverted. It's about betrayed trust. Trust of clients who believed they were investing in their future. Trust of a business partner who almost lost her life. Trust of an elderly mother emotionally manipulated. And most deeply, he paused, glancing briefly at me. Trust of a family who believed they knew the man living under their roof. As the prosecutor continued to detail the evidence, the fraud documents, victim testimonies, Christine's account of the attempted murder, I studied Richard. His face remained impassive, a mask of calm that I now recognized as his most effective defense. Only occasionally did a muscle in his jaw twitch, the only visible sign of tension. When it was Christine's turn to testify, she entered the courtroom with firm steps. The physical wounds had healed, but something in her eyes, a caution, a distrust, suggested the emotional wounds were still fresh. Dressed in a simple suit, her hair pulled back in an austere bun, she looked very different from the bloody and desperate woman I had seen 6 months ago. Her testimony was clear and direct. She described how she's met Richard, how he brought her into the fraud scheme with promises of quick wealth, how she gradually realized the extent of his lies. And then in graphic detail she recounted the night he tried to kill her. He changed in an instant, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. One moment we were arguing about the money, about the tickets, about his plans to abandon me. The next second his eyes, they transformed. He took my perfume bottle from the dresser and hit me over the head. She lightly touched her temple where a thin scar was still visible. When I fell, he started to strangle me. He said I was a problem, that I knew too much, that I talked too much, that no one would miss me. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a perpetually skeptical expression, did his best to discredit Christine's testimony. He suggested she was just as guilty as Richard in the fraud, that she was trying to get a lighter sentence by pinning all the blame on him. He implied the fight had been mutual, that she had attacked Richard first. But Christine remained unshakable. Yes, I participated in the fraud. I have never denied it. I am prepared to face the legal consequences of my actions. But no, I did not attack Richard. And no, I did not make up the attempted murder. The medical records, the photos of my injuries, the blood found in the house, all of it confirms my version. Richard Anderson tried to kill me because I found out he planned to betray me, keep all the money, and abandon me. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were talking about someone else's life. I answered the prosecutor's questions clearly, recounting the day I arrived at Mrs. Beatrice's house, the warning from Mrs. Sarah, the discovery of the blood, the revelation about the fraud. The defense attorney was more aggressive with me than he had been with Christine. He insinuated that I must have suspected Richard's activities, that it was impossible to live with someone for so many years without noticing discrepancies. You never questioned the origin of the resources that supported your lifestyle, he asked, his voice loaded with insinuation. What lifestyle? I retorted, feeling a spark of indignation. We lived modestly. Richard's salary at the investment office was good but not extravagant. Our house was mortgaged. Our car was a basic model. There were never any signs of unexplained wealth. And the frequent business trips, the secret calls, the long hours at work, you never suspected anything. Suspected what exactly? That my husband was committing fraud? That he was leading a double life? No, I never suspected that. I trusted him. I looked directly at Richard as I said the last words. That was my only mistake. Over the next few days, more witnesses were called. Victims of the fraud, police officers involved in the investigation, forensic experts who analyzed the evidence of the attempted murder. The prosecution's case was solid, almost irrefutable. The defense tried to argue that Richard had been manipulated by Christine, that she was the mastermind behind the fraud. They tried to downplay the severity of the assault, suggesting Richard had acted in the heat of the moment with no real intention to kill. But the evidence, including searches found on Richard's computer about how to hide a body and how deep to bury, contradicted that narrative. On the second to last day of the trial, Richard finally had the chance to speak. He stood up slowly, adjusted his suit jacket, and looked around the courtroom before fixing his gaze on the judge. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I am not going to deny the accusations against me. The evidence is clear." A murmur went through the courtroom. No one expected a confession at this point. "I committed fraud. I deceived people who trusted me. I betrayed my business partner, my mother." He paused, glancing briefly in my direction. "And my family." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was in turmoil. Was this another performance, another manipulation, or was there some genuine truth in his words? "I have no excuses for my actions," he continued, "only explanations which I know do not lessen the severity of what I did. I started with small diversions, believing I could pay the money back before anyone noticed. But one lie led to another, one diversion to a bigger one, and soon I was trapped in a web of my own making." He took a deep breath before continuing. "As for the accusation of attempted murder against Christine Mendez," his eyes shifted briefly to her sitting on the other side of the courtroom. "There was an altercation, yes. I lost control. I acted violently, thoughtlessly. I did not intend to kill her. Only to silence her. When I realized the magnitude of what I had done, I panicked and fled. It was cowardice, I know." "And your wife, your son?" the judge asked. An unusual intervention, but one that seemed to vocalize the question everyone in the room was asking. "The fake kidnapping to extort your mother." Richard looked down for the first time. "That was my lowest point," he admitted. "I was desperate. I needed money to run. I used the people who should have been most important to me as pawns in a sordid game." He looked up again, meeting my gaze directly. "Anna, I know you will probably never forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that, despite all my lies, my feelings for you and Petey were always real. You were the only genuine thing in my life of falsehoods." I felt tears burn in my eyes, but I refused to shed them. I wouldn't give Richard that satisfaction, that proof that his words could still affect me. On the last day of the trial, the judge delivered the sentence, 20 years in prison, for financial fraud, attempted murder, and extortion. No possibility of parole for at least 15 years. As the officers led Richard away, he looked at me one last time. There was no more falsehood in his gaze, just a resigned sadness and something that looked almost like relief, as if the weight of the lies had finally been lifted from his shoulders. When we left the courthouse, Mrs. Beatrice and I walked side by side in silence for a few moments. "It's over," she said finally, her voice tired but firm. "Yes," I agreed. "Now we can start to rebuild." She squeezed my hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of our shared history, our shared pain, and now our shared hope. "Together," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. For the first time in months, I really believed we would be okay. And surprisingly, I believed it too. 2 years passed since that lunch. Daniel and I moved slowly, building a relationship based on absolute honesty, mutual respect, and a shared understanding of each other's frailties and strengths. Petey and Juliet became inseparable, a little team united by books, games, and children's secrets. Mrs. Beatrice adopted Daniel as the son she never had, besides Richard, often inviting him over to cook together, teaching him family recipes. Richard remains in prison facing his sentence with a resignation that suggests some kind of internal transformation. Petey visits him every 2 months, always returning with stories about the books his father is reading, the courses he's taking, the letters he writes to other fraud victims as a form of reparation. I don't know if that transformation is genuine, if it will last beyond the prison walls. But for now, it seems real to Petey. And that's what matters. As for me, I learned that life rarely follows the paths we plan, that the people we love can betray us deeply, and that strangers can become our safe harbor. That strength comes not from the absence of falls, but from the determination to get up after them. That whisper from Mrs. Sarah on that fateful afternoon had changed my life forever. It had destroyed the reality I knew. But from the ashes of that destruction, something new was emerging. Something truer, more authentic. Something built not on convenient lies, but on difficult, honest truths. And for that, as strange as it sounds, I am grateful.